So microservice architecture on the AWS, right? So monolithic application यदि है तो monolithic application में multiple layers होती है, but everything will be packaged into a one single application, correct? मतलब आपका UI लेयर भी
Right.
उसी में होगा, आपका सर्वर लेयर भी उसी में होगा और डेटाबेस भी, डेटाबेस और समथिंग वी कॉल्ड एज अ persistent लेयर, ORM लेयर जिसको हम बोलते हैं, करेक्ट? एवरीथिंग विल बी इनसाइड द वन, बट माइक्रो सर्विस आर्किटेक्चर में यू स्प्लिट UI लेयर अलग होगी, आपका वेब लेयर अलग होगा, और उसके बाद में इसके अलावा यू विल कनेक्ट टू डेटाबेस, और इन योर वेब लेयर और एप्लीकेशन लेयर you will have a multiple services, correct? So that is, we know that how the microservice architecture works, correct? तो अब microservice architecture में जब आप सेटअप करोगे तो what you can do it, right? So you will have a particularly different microservices you can set it up here, right? So you will have a user interface. अब user interface में आप बोल सकते हो कि what we can call as अब वो मोबाइल एप्लीकेशन हो सकता है, मे बी आपकी ब्राउजर से एक्सेसिबल एप्लीकेशन हो सकती है, और मे बी सम अदर वेज, राइट? तो यूजर हम लोग बोल सकते हैं, ठीक है, आइदर इट इज अ मोबाइल एप्लीकेशन और मे बी अ ब्राउजर एप्लीकेशन विच इज डेवलप्ड आइदर इनटू अ रिएक्ट और मे बी इन एंगुलर। तो वहां से whenever you are connecting to any other microservices, so you can use, let's say is a simple concept is you have deployed your microservices with the help of ECS, Elastic Container Service, as a different containers, ठीक है? And to connect to these containers you are using a, right, load balancers. So load balancer, so you will send the request to a load balancer, and from the load balancer, you will send it to a particular containers, and from containers, you can connect to a different database, right? Maybe you can connect to same database or maybe different database. So as an example, take an example that one service is connecting to Elastic Cache, one is for Aurora, one is for DocumentDB. So this is a one of that implementation, something we called as a microservice architecture on the AWS. तो अभी लेट से कि बैंकिंग एप्लीकेशन है, तो बैंकिंग एप्लीकेशन में आपकी जो भी सर्विसेज है, प्रोडक्ट सर्विस, आपका लेट से कस्टमर सर्विस, अकाउंट सर्विस, रिकॉन्सिलेशन सर्विस, ऑल दीज सर्विसेज विल बी डिप्लॉयड एज अ independent container, right, using that elastic container service, and you can connect and you can deploy it, ठीक है? अब user interface, right, you can understand it. Now here you can also use 2-3 things here. Let's say if it is in that scenario, if you really wanted to have some kind of a static web content, so एक particular example ले लेते हैं, ये S3 और Amazon CloudFront क्यों यूज कर रहे हैं हम लोग? S3 हम लोग यूज कर रहे हैं, जो भी static content है, we will keep and put it into an S3, and we will load with the help of CloudFront into a basically when you are displaying it. सो ये पर्टिकुलर सॉल्यूशन उस सॉल्यूशन के लिए, लेट से ई कॉमर्स एप्लीकेशन है जहां पर आपके पास में many more images, right, you are uploading for each and every product. So every time you are displaying these images, what you do, either you can fetch it from the database if you are storing it, or maybe you put it into any other file system, or maybe you keep it into an AWS S3, and you can get that image and you can display it. So let's say if I wanted to search for a shoes, so all these shoes related products need to be displayed with the image, correct? So these particularly images you can fetch it from here, and the image related data, that is you can get it from somewhere database or like this. So that image will be fetched from this, and this CloudFront will show it to you. So CloudFront will be helping it to you for maintaining the basically nothing but the caching at the UI layer, right? So you can say frequently access data, it will be cached so that it will not be hitting to a backend service or maybe a backend database. It can immediately show directly to a users, and also it will support at the region level also, to what we can say, we can minimize that network latency, something we can call as. So there are some other facilities also CloudFront provided, correct? So the load time of your page will be minimized here, so you can improve the performance. Okay. So client of a microservices are served from the closest edge locations, right? And get the response either from the cache or the proxy server with the optimized connection to the origin here, right? So latencies can be significantly reduced, जो हमने बात की हुई है, correct? So different edge locations, so different locations, यदि if some your customers are from US region or maybe European region, so in that scenario you can minimize the latency, uh, whatever that data travel time, right, which is basically you are taking up, so that is basically can be minimized here. So that's why we are using this kind of but this will not be going to help for banking applications, because we are not loading this data and sharing the image of this, so it will not be very much supporting for CloudFront and this kind of with S3 related to set up banking applications or maybe trading applications like that, correct? Now, microservices implementations with serverless, when we are talking about serverless, right? So coming back to uh, one more diagram, correct? Now, here it is one more setup is you can understand it here before going to serverless here. You can also go with the Amazon CloudFront, and CloudFront can go to a API gateway. And from the API gateway, you can connect to a EC2 instance also, AWS Lambda also, or maybe you can connect to some other services. Okay. So this is another way for implementing your microservices. So in that scenario, maybe there are some other mobile client or website or some other partner services, maybe any other client, right? From the internet can connect to your Amazon CloudFront, and from there you can connect to a gateway, and from gateway you can basically do it, or maybe this gateway can also populate from the get the response from the cache as well. So this is another kind of an implementation when we are talking about setting up the microservices on the AWS. So there is a different ways and different what we can call as solutions, right? So in that scenario, you don't need to be here load this data from your S3 and then display the images, all these things. This is you don't need to do it, correct? So this is another way you can use it. So if Amazon API gateway can also will help it to you for helping it to you for this API gateway implementation, correct? So generally we know that we implement the API gateway with that Resilience 4J, right? Spring Boot, Spring API gateway, Spring Boot API gateway. So rather than you can also use that Amazon API gateway, and then you can use AWS Lambda, you can connect, or maybe you can connect to EC2, or maybe you can to connect also to some other publicly accessible endpoints are also like this. So you can connect to different other services from the gateway here. Okay, and there is some particular service, something we called as a CloudWatch, which will be helping us for a monitoring. So Amazon CloudWatch will basically for watching it that, and Cloud Trail along with this, it will helping us for maintaining the records. And then along with this, you can what we can do, you can set up some kind of trigger points, and if something goes wrong, so we can also set up an alert. After this alert, you can send that an email or message or something like that, and something goes wrong. So that's why we use that Amazon CloudWatch and CloudTrail, and then you can initiate the alert, and you can use that some kind of a messaging, or maybe trigger it with the help of some messaging like this, or you can use the event bridge and other services, and you can trigger it. So that is the way you can majorly watch, and you can do a monitoring. So CloudWatch and CloudTrail, we will use it for cloud when we are talking about, especially for a monitoring purpose, right? So gateway allows you to create your API programmatically by importing a Swagger definitions using either a AWS API or AWS Management Console, right? So gateway serves as a front door to any web application running on Amazon EC2, ECS, AWS Lambda, or in any on-premises environment, right? So API gateway allows you to run API without having any managed servers, correct? So this way you can also implement it, right? This is another way for implementing that your microservices, correct? So all the API calls will be handled by the API gateway, right? And this API gateway will interact to some other subsequent services. Now there is a concept of a serverless. So serverless microservices also you need to think about that this is another way for implementation. So no server is easier to manage than no servers, right? So how you can go with the no server? So in that scenario, what you can use a AWS Lambda, right? Serverless. So what we are saying is you will get a call, you will call to a gateway will call to a Lambda, and Lambda will connect to some other database. So you can use your code and deploy your code with the help of AWS Lambda, correct? So all your services will be deployed with the help of AWS Lambda, right? So Lambda is tightly integrated with the API gateway. So this is very important question. Generally, we use the API gateway with the AWS Lambda, correct? But if you wanted to use with API gateway with some other services also, but when we are using a Lambda, we use that API gateway, correct? Apart from that, there is also a, here we are not using a load balancer, correct? So you also need to think about the load balancer also if you really wanted to look for load balancers. And apart from that, you can also have a setting of that auto scaling. Okay. So that is also some more concept we can integrate it, but don't be confused here. So these are the three models, but we can have various kind of deployment and the setup of a microservices on the AWS. Okay. So the ability to make a synchronous call from the API gateway to Lambda enables that creation of a fully serverless application, and it described in our documentation here. So this way you can put it here. So you need to have a multiple Lambda will be running here, maybe for your banking application, product service, account service. There are many more services like that, correct? And it is basically eliminates the architecture burden to design for scale and high availability and eliminate the operational effort for running and monitoring the microservices underlying infrastructure. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे ये सारा बर्डन आपका कंप्लीटली चले जाता है, राइट? So architectural burden for design and scale for high availability and eliminate the operational effort to running and monitoring the microservices. So this way you can have a serverless implementation of a microservices, correct? Now, this is you can use API gateway to load balancer to a Fargate here. This is another way for a implementation. So Amazon Aurora is a serverless database, right? And it is nothing but Aurora, I guess, if I'm not wrong, no, Amazon Athena is, I guess, is for RDS. So Amazon Aurora.
Aurora is for
Hmm?
Amazon Aurora is for the RDS.
RDS, okay. So it is basically which is an on-demand auto scaling configuration for Aurora MySQL compatible. It is basically an supporting for an RDS here. So this way also, so AWS Fargate is nothing but AWS managed instances, which you can get it and you can set up and deploy your all your microservices. So this is architecture for one of the services, but in your AWS Fargate, you can have a multiple other services will be running it. Okay, so you will have a multiple instances, right, for AWS Fargate. For number of microservices you have, these kind of services can be running here, correct? So this way you can also use for what we can call as for microservices setup. So Docker container are used with the AWS Fargate, right? So it is not necessary always. You can also use your own EC2, but if you can, there is an option either you can use AWS Fargate or you can use a EC2. So if you wanted to manage these instances, you can use your own managed instances. If AWS managed instances, you will use a AWS Fargate here. This is serverless microservices using the AWS Fargate here. This is another way for implementing a microservices on the AWS. So till now we have seen it three architectural concept here, right? Lambda based applications, right? So you can also use a AWS SAM, which is convenient way to define the serverless application, right? So AWS, right? SAM is a native supported by the cloud formation and define the simplified syntax of expressing serverless resources. So now you can also use a service discovery, DNS based service discovery. So I guess many such time we have discussed that service discovery, right? So we will discuss the service discovery concept, right? And AWS provide the server side the service discovery. Correct. So how the service discovery help us? So Amazon ECS now include integrated service discovery that makes it easiest way for your containerized service to discover and connect with each other. This is a one thing. So many such way we can implement the service discovery on the AWS. So service discovery, we will discuss later. But as of now, you need to understand here. These are the particular. Now here there is a one more way you need to understand rather than AWS Fargate. You can also use with ALB with the what we can call as your EKS. So you can deploy your services with the help of Kubernetes service as a different pods, and in that pod you will run the containers. Correct. So that is also you can use it. So that is you can understand there is another way for setting up the microservice architecture on the AWS, right? So there are multiple services you can use it, right? And multiple kind of a permutation and combinations you can use it based on your requirement and based on your application configuration and the architecture concept here. Correct. So this way you can set it up your application on particularly on AWS, and you can use a different type of database. So either you can use Amazon Document DB, DynamoDB, different RDS, or maybe Amazon Aurora, whatever it is. These things you can use it. It up to you how you wanted to and which database you feel that it is very much suitable for particularly you are setting up an application here. So this way, at least you can understand the microservice architecture setup on the AWS.